Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Dennis. I guess the first order of business is we're not, as colleges, competitive with each other, but I do want to note that the Marist women are going to win the MAC championship by happening to beat Quinnipiac University this week. Having gotten rid of Siena only a few weeks earlier. So I don't know what that means, but we'll just leave it at that. But in over 3 decades of measuring public opinion, Barbara and I could not have wished for any better direction than we've gotten from our first president, our president, Dennis Murray, our POTUS, our POTUM, I guess, if it's Marist. So we thank you for your leadership, Dennis, to Marist College and for everything you've done with us in the Marist poll. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Chris and his advancement team, especially Amy and Val, who are been working with us during the course of this year for their suggestions and assistance, and to the Marist poll team, which provides exceptional energy every day, and usually nights too, because like vampires, pollsters come out at night, and so that's what we do. But I'd like to ask Mary Griffith, Sue Kenny, Stephanie Calvano, Natalie Jackson, Daniela Charter, Alicia Colomer, Mike Conti, Ashley Hansen, and Jamie Lee Bishop to please rise. Okay, that's enough for them. Okay, now, there are many Marist alumni pollsters in the House. I met Judy, who I knew as Judy Strigaro on the way in, class of 1979, member of the first exit poll way back when we were doing paper and pencil. There are a lot of current Marist College students who are here as well, and we welcome all of you, friends of the Marist poll and friends of Marist College, for attending. I'd also like to acknowledge Barb's father, Herm, who's here, my wife, Nancy. We're pleased you're here, like you had a choice. I'd like to also give a shout out to my father-in-law, Nancy's father, Ray Robinson. He's the only nonagenarian in the room, or at least he's the only one who will admit it. But to put it into perspective, Woodrow Wilson was president when Ray was born, so you can work on it. So Coolidge had been elected but hadn't taken office. We had to check that. Okay, so it was the end of the Wilson years, not the beginning, so it's okay. The Marist poll has always been a unique educational program, and Barbara and I have stood on the shoulders of 3,000 Marist College students over the 35 years in conducting the public opinion research. Along the way, we have had the special opportunity to work with many professionals from the world of politics and the media, and we are extremely thrilled to have our top 4 draft choices here on the stage tonight, and I'm sure by evening's end you will also realize how they will enlighten us as they have the public over many years. So let me, with no further introduction other than to introduce them. On my immediate right is Mark Murray. Mark is the senior political editor for NBC News and our close working partner with the NBC News Marist poll when we do our key state elections around the nation. Reflecting today's communications technology, I counted 256 emails, not including texts or tweets, between us over the last 2 years. We've only met 3 times in person, so we do recognize each other, but that was it. Okay, next to Mark is Steve Thoma, who's the senior White House correspondent and government and politics editor for the McClatchy News Service. Steve is our partner with the McClatchy Marist national polls that we do, and he's met Marist students on many occasions on campus and even in New Hampshire for a dinner on the eve of New Hampshire primary that none of us will ever forget, but that was certainly a special evening. He also goes by the title of president. There's more than one president in the room. President Thoma is the head of the White House Correspondents Association, which will be celebrating their 100th anniversary on May 3rd. They picked my birthday to do it, which I'm delighted with. But you will see him next to President Obama on the stage in the Washington Hilton on May 3rd. To Steve's right is Amy Walter. Amy is the national editor of the Cook Political Report. We first got to know Amy when she was editor-in-chief of The Hotline and later as political director for ABC News. Amy can actually recite all 435 names of Congress. Okay, but she's our guest tonight, and we're not going to make her do that. She actually can do that. Actually, she's going to correct us and say there's a couple of vacancies. Okay, easy. I knew you were thinking that, right? Okay. and last and certainly not least, Barbara and I met Mike Oreskes in 1982 when we first started conducting statewide polls on then gubernatorial candidate Mario Cuomo. Mike's career has taken him to the position of Washington bureau chief of the New York Times and is now vice president and senior managing editor for the Associated Press. In 1991, at an event held at Marist College like this gathering tonight, Mike said, "I don't have any illusions that campaigns are always a place to talk about our problems. I do have the idea that perhaps campaigns might be one of the places where sometimes we can talk about our problems." Well, tonight we'll see if Mike still agrees with himself. But anyway, please extend a warm welcome to this distinguished group. And I'd like to turn things over to my partner in crime, Barbara, who will set the political landscape with a few numbers from some of our recent polls. What are pollsters, if anything, without numbers? Then we're going to kick things around up here for a while with the panel, and then open it up to you folks for some questions. So, Barbara, it's all yours.
Thank you, Lee, and welcome everyone. It's so wonderful to see all of you here. So as Lee mentioned, I always come along with numbers to show. And so we've had the pleasure of partnering with Mark and Steve on many polling projects. So I'm gonna just share a couple of the recent findings which we think may be noteworthy for tonight's discussion. Today we find that Americans are in an incredibly grumpy mood. By nearly 2 to 1, they believe that the country is moving in the wrong direction. And if you follow that red line along, you can see that this really isn't anything new. The right direction, wrong direction numbers have been upside down for many years now. People tell us that they are struggling financially to make ends meet. 37% describe their family financial picture as weak. And more than 4 in 10 say that they're saving less. 44% worry that they may not be able to manage their debt. In a glimmer of good news, there is a growing number of people who, actually the largest since 2009, who say that they think their finances will actually improve in the coming year. And that's something that we're just really seeing change a little bit recently. But there's still this real economic haze, and many people have lost faith. They don't think that their hard work is being rewarded. 68% struggle to reach the American dream. Most Americans, 80%, say that they feel that they need more effort now to get ahead than previous generations have. And 85% think that a different set of rules applies to those who are well off. So not surprisingly, there's this huge disconnect between the public and their decision makers. People are concerned that government policy leaves out that our politicians are out of touch. Most people feel that. A majority believe that the middle class is actually the socioeconomic group that is being left behind. And 65% say that Washington needs major changes. And in fact, when we ask them about the politicians in Washington, 57% tell us that they think they deserve a grade of D or F. So Americans are far from convinced that Washington can really make any headway in the next year. Only a third, 33%, think that President Obama will be able to accomplish the types of policy changes that they would like to see in the country in the next year. And they're even less optimistic about the congressional GOP. Just over a quarter of Americans believe that they will be able to move things forward this year. So these are some of the numbers that we've been looking at. I'm sure you've also been hearing, because there's been a lot of polls which have been showing similar findings, which NBC, Wall Street Journal was just out this week as well. So Lee?
No, I feel like you just
we can get to the chase.
Yeah, I feel like I just looked at a bad set of my X-rays or something. But anyway, let's bring in the panel. First question, is the public sense of dissatisfaction justified? What's the tone in Washington? Just what's causing all this disgruntlement?
Well, let me, first of all, before we get into any of the questions, which I'm sure we'll all attempt to evade, I want to add something to what President Murray said, and I want to congratulate Lee and Barbara on your 35th anniversary, and I want to say something very specific, because one of our problems in the world today is that we live in an age where reporting and research have been replaced by once over lightly and outright flim-flam a lot of the time. And you guys really have set a standard, and I don't just say that as a nice thing because you're my friend, but that standard really matters, and trying to hold people to a standard does matter, and it matters more now than it mattered 35 years ago when you started. And I can't believe, by the way, how old we are now. I do want to say that. So now to your question.
Thank you.
I think this is a remarkable moment. It's really not a moment I would want to be a political leader, but it's a great moment for us being political observers, because it's really extraordinary. So here we are at a time when the wars are coming to an end, the economy is on the mend, and yet the country is in a mood that's probably about as sour as it's ever been, as you just described. And what that says to me is that there is a much more profound loss of faith that's now become baked into the country's psyche. And that's a lot scarier than the old idea that the right track, wrong track number was somehow reflective of economic mood and maybe Watergate. There was always something to explain it. Now, the explanation is really deep inside us, and that's a bigger problem than the ones we used to face.
Mark, did you want to jump in on some of the things that you guys found along those lines this week, too?
You showed the right track, wrong track numbers and over time, and one thing that's really interesting is that you almost see 2004 as an inflection point. And of course, what happened in 2004, it was when people started to see that the Iraq War was turning in the wrong direction. And of course, we've always had really difficult politics in this country. We've had canings in the United States Congress. We've had duels with our politicians in the 19th century. But it really does seem that we've kind of entered a more cynical age. And even if someone might say, they're economic, they have a good job, they're very happy about X, Y, and Z, but they're down on the country because maybe a neighbor or a friend doesn't have a job, or maybe that you're angry about the person who's in the White House, or you're angry about the person who's in the House of Representatives. But I do think, and Michael put it really well, it's a fascinating time for us reporters to really follow, but we are living in a more cynical age where it used to be if somebody says, I had this new invention, I want to try it, and everyone would kind of cheer them on. And now it almost seems like if you try to do something, people on Twitter saying, I can't believe you want to do something like that. And of course, I think we do kind of sometimes vary between cynical ages and more heroic ages, but right now, and I think you go look back to 2004, there's just this cynicism, even that is masking what some people might say, a better situation than we'd had in previous years.
Is it leadership?
I actually, I'll differ just a little bit, because I think the disconnect, it
That's
doesn't surprise
Steve.
Lee at all.
That's Steve.
He's happy in a cynical age.
I'm more a skeptic than a cynic. But I think that the mood in Washington right now is disconnected from the country, and the country actually may react well over the next year or two, and here's why. I think the shutdown last fall changed the tone in Washington. It kind of, to be glib, it took the caffeine out of the Tea Party. It gave John Boehner little room to maneuver. We had just spent 3 or 4 years always on the cusp of a debt ceiling debacle, a default, shutdown from shutdown, and all of a sudden, all that wind has gone out of Washington. And all they're talking about is passing the budget, not a lot of big initiatives. Politicians are unhappy. Media don't like that they're not going to pass big initiatives. But I suspect, if, as Mike points out, the economy's starting to take hold, income hasn't caught up, but things start to get a little better, the wars end, and the government isn't screwing things up, that those numbers might tick up a little bit.
So Amy, you can make this 2-2 or 3-1.
Well, I'm going to be contrarian just to be, or actually, maybe I'll just infuse just a teeny bit of optimism in this, because this is totally depressing. So, right, like everybody just go, have a great day. Enjoy your evening. You should have brought drinks for everyone afterwards.
They told me they were.
There
are actually.
So, oh, good. All right.
But not until
they were
we
here. But
finish.
on to this part. So two things. The first is that you will see, to your point where you say in your numbers that individuals believe their finances are going to get better. There's an underlying strain of optimism in this country that, especially when you go overseas, they do not understand about Americans, right? Even when things look as bad as they can be, Americans always seem to think like, we'll figure it out, we always do, we're gonna be fine. And the disconnect between, I feel like my finances are gonna get better, but I don't trust that the country is gonna get better. I don't think my neighbor is necessarily gonna get better. So this feeling, it's not just disconnected from politics, this feeling that overall, the entire sort of establishment has let them down, right? They trust themselves, they trust their family members, they trust close friends, but they don't trust big institutions, whether it's the church, whether it's the banks, whether it's professional sports, every one of those things has let them down. The other thing I will say, just to give a little strain of optimism, so the best job I had was working with Charlie Cook, and I met candidates running for the House, right? This is as close as you're gonna get to real people in Washington, right? And before they get here, right? These are your people who, most of them are gonna lose, right? I would meet about 200 candidates. They, at best, had a 50-50 chance that they were going to come to Washington. They came from all kinds of backgrounds. Some of them were incredibly impressive. Some of them were, I'm sure, very nice. And I'm sure their mothers loved them. But they weren't going to light the world on fire. But you know what? Every single one of them came to Washington, even though intellectually they knew this wasn't going to happen, but believing they could make a difference. And I still get to see, I get to sit in on some of those meetings, even today, and I keep asking candidates that, which is, why would you want to do this? Especially people who live in really wonderful places, like you're from Santa Barbara, or you live in you're in Hawaii. Do you understand? You have to come and live here, right? Like you can't do it from Hawaii. And they do believe that they can make a difference in this. So believe it or not, there still are people out there that think that they can make a change, and 99% of them you will never hear about. You're going to hear about the Tea Party people, you'll hear about Anthony Weiner, unfortunately, but you're not going to hear about them, and they are quietly getting the job done.
It's worth, this is all true, and it's worth noting that this decline in faith in institutions is a hole we've been digging for 45, 50 years. As you guys know the numbers better than I do, but at the end of the Eisenhower administration, most people had a very high regard for the president, for the Congress, for all these institutions, and we've worked really hard at undermining that over a long period of time.